Hey boys and girls, so today we're going to be going over Unit 7, Lesson 3, which is Domain and Range of a Graph. Before we get started, just make sure that your name is written down at the top. All right, and then we can jump on in. As we read the do now, it says use the graph of y equals x squared minus 3 to answer the questions below. I can see that y equals x squared minus 3 is graphed right over on the side here. Part A, what is the minimum y value of this graph? So when I see that keyword minimum, I should be thinking what's going to be my lowest value. All right, so if I'm looking at the y values, again, the y value, the y-axis moves up and down. This is my vertical line, all right? So I want to see what's my lowest y value, which would be right down here. Okay, and I can see I'm hitting the y value, -3. All right, so when it says what is the minimum y value of this graph, it would be the y value that is equaling -3. Part B says write an inequality to represent the y values, plural, all right, of this graph. So if I want to write an inequality, I'm just going to underline the question there. Write an inequality to represent the y values. All right, so again, y moves up and down. So we've already looked at what the lowest y value is going to be, my minimum. Now I want to look at my maximum, what my highest y value would be. All right, and that's going to be right up top, right here to the left, or right over here to the right. Okay, so a lot of you might right now be thinking that 6 is going to be my maximum value, but I have to look at the graph itself, Just like when I looked at my minimum, I looked at the lowest y value that was on my graph. Okay, so -3 was my lowest y value on my graph. If I look at the largest, my maximum y value on the graph, it's actually an arrow. Okay, and arrows represent infinity because it's going on forever. So now I have to ask myself, is that going to be positive or negative infinity? But it's going to be positive infinity on both sides because I'm moving up forever. I'm getting larger, right? Positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 100, a million, right? It's going on to positive infinity forever. So if I want to write an inequality, I would say that my y values, all right, they can equal -3 because -3 was my lowest y value, or I'd have to be larger than -3. Again, I'd have to be larger than -3. So this would be y is greater than or equal to -3. All right, and this would be an example of finding the range of a graph because I'm looking at the y values. Y represents range. And we're going to see that in a minute as we look at these notes right down below. So it says, remember, our domain is going to be all x values. All right, and don't forget x moves left and right. All right, and I know that my range is going to be all of my y values. And we know that range, my y values, moves up and down, just like the axes on a graph. So it says we can use inequality notation, or really we can use interval notation to represent the domain and range of a graph. So if we want to use interval notation, because that's really what we're going to do in today's notes, it says when we see arrows like we did in the do now, that's always going to represent infinity. Okay, it could be positive infinity if it's pointing up, or it could be negative infinity if it's pointing down. Same thing for the domain. If it's going to the left, that would be negative infinity. If it's going to the right, that would be positive. All right, but I know that we always represent infinity with parentheses. All right, so just be aware of that. And then again, when we see open circles at the end of a graph, open means it's not included. So if it's not included, we use parentheses, okay? Or I would use the less than or the greater than symbol because I'm not equaling that value. I'm just less than or greater than to it. And again, that's an open circle. If it's a closed circle, that would be a bracket. Or I would see a less than or equal to, a greater than or equal to symbol because I could be that value. All right, so again, that would be a closed circle or it would be a bracket. So now, if I want to find the domain and the range in the do now, One more time, I know that domain is going to be all of my x values. I know that the range is going to be all of my y values. I know that the domain moves left to right. Let's add that to our notes at the bottom here. I want you to literally write it moves left to right. And I know that the range moves up and down. All right, and I literally want you to write up and down. All right, so just be aware of that. So as I go back and I look at the domain moves left to right, just like we said a second ago. So as I look at the domain, I want to see on my x-axis what is going to be all the way to the left on the graph. So as I follow the graph all the way to the left, this is where it's ending up. And as I follow the graph all the way to the right, I can see again, this is where I'm ending up. But I can see that all the way to the left is an arrow and all the way to the right is also an arrow. Okay, we just went over that arrows represent infinity, but you have to be really careful. I know both of these arrows are pointing up and this can be a little bit confusing. If the x-axis is again moving left to right, I'm looking at the values that are all the way to the left. I'm getting negative values here, right? -1, -2, all the way to -5. But I'm not going to stop at -5 because when I'm looking all the way to the left on the graph, I can see there's an arrow and an arrow represents infinity. But it would really be negative infinity because again, I'm looking at my x-axis only. All right, so all the way to the left is negative values, but I'm going to the left forever. So as I jump down and I want to answer what my domain will be, it's going to be moving from negative infinity all the way to, now if I look back up top again, all the way to the right, those are positive values, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, but if I look at all the way to the right on the graph, again, that's another arrow. Okay, but looking at what those x values would be, those would be positive x values. This would be positive infinity. Okay, because I'm going to the right-hand side forever. So when I jump down below, I want to add that on to my answer. I'm moving from negative infinity to positive infinity. And I know that both of those are going to get parentheses because they are not included. I do not know what infinity is. I don't know what negative infinity is. So I can't include it. It's going to get a parenthesis. Now, if I want to look at the range, well, I know that the range is all of my y values. Y moves up and down. So let me jump back up top. I can see that my value all the way at the bottom here on my graph was -3 because again, the range is my y values. This y value was -3. If I look all the way up, again, on the graph, all the way up was that arrow. Same thing on the left-hand side, all the way up was an arrow. So I'm going to say that my range, my lowest value is -3, but my highest value is an arrow that's going up for positive values forever. So it's going to be -3 to positive infinity. And we kind of talked about that in the do now earlier. So down below, when I fill in what my range is going to be, it's going to be my lowest value, which is -3, all the way to my highest value, which would be positive infinity. Infinity always gets a parenthesis because we do not know what it is. But this time, -3 would get a bracket because -3 is a point that is on the graph. So here, this would be a closed circle. It is an actual point that's on my graph. So -3 would be included, whereas infinity is not included. All right, and then again, that would be the end of our notes for the first page. Now I'm going to take a second. Let's jump to page number 2. All right. Here we go. All right, so as we look at example 1 here, it says the graph below represents the parabolic path of a ball kicked by a young child. State the domain and range of this graph. So again, I'm just going to jump in here and look at what my question is asking. I have to state the domain and the range of the graph. So I'm going to start off by just writing those on the side here. I'm going to write those vocabulary words: domain, range. All right. I know that the domain is my X values, and I know that the range is going to be my Y values. I know that my domain, my X values, move left to right, and I know that my Y values for my range moves up and down. All right, so let's jump on in here. This is a key word. I just want to talk about it for a quick minute. Parabolic path. This really is saying that my path is going to look like a parabola. Parabola. Okay, and parabolas look like those happy or frowny faces. We're going to have an entire unit on parabolas, so just be aware of that. So here we go. This would be like a sad face. Are you with me for this parabolic path? But again, I'm just looking for the domain and the range. So I know that domain moves left to right. So I'm going to look on this graph. What's my point that's plotted all the way to the left? And I can see it's right here. And what's the point on my graph that's all the way to the right? And I can see that's right here. This is a point that's on the graph all the way to the left. This is a point that's on the graph all the way to the right. Domain is X. I'm only looking at my X values right now. So I know this would be an X value of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So when I want to decide what my domain is, my domain would be 0 all the way over to 6 when I'm looking at those X values. So that's what I'm going to write here, 0 to 6. And now I have to decide if those are going to get parentheses, brackets, what's going on here. Well, this is an actual point that's plotted on my parabola. This is where it starts. It starts at 0. So because this is a plotted point, it's going to get a bracket. 0 is included. Same thing with 6. My parabola is ending at 6. 6 is a point that is on that graph. So 6 will also get a bracket as well. Now, if I look at the range, range moves up and down. So I can see that on my y-axis, up and down here, my lowest y value is being plotted right here, okay? And then my highest y value all the way up top is being plotted right here. All right, so again, this would be my lowest y value. This would be my highest y value. Y moves up and down, so I'm only looking at my y-axis right now. Well, I know that y, again, would have to start at 0. And then if I keep numbering my y-axis, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so I can see here that my lowest y value is 0. All right, I know that my graph starts at 0 and it really ends over here at 6. But if I'm looking at my y values for these points here, that y value is 0. Okay, and it's 0 for both. All right, so I know that my lowest y value is 0 and my highest y value is 8. So that's going to be my range here. I'm going to say this is moving from 0 to 8. And now I have to decide, well, this is the point 0, 0. It is plotted. So 0 is included for the range. It's an actual point on the graph. Same thing for 8. It's an actual point that is plotted. It is on my graph. So 8 would be included as well. So 0 and 8 would both get a bracket as well. All right, that's going to be number 1. Let's look at number 2. Number 2 says a swim team member performs a dive from a 14-foot high springboard. The parabola below shows the path of her dive. State the domain and range of the graph. So again, here we go. I can see here, it's again telling me that I have a parabola. That's going to be a nice vocabulary word that I would probably want to box. But I'm really just looking at the question here, which says state the domain and range of the graph. So I'm going to do what I did up top. I know that domain. All right, that's going to be my x values. And I know that range is going to be my y values. All right, so that's what I'm looking for when it comes to domain and range. Again, I know that my domain, my x values move left to right, and I know that range, my y values, they move up and down. So just keep that in mind here. So again, as I look at the domain, let me do the x values first. I want to look at my x values, again, which move left to right. So as I'm looking at this graph and it starts right at this value, I want to ask myself, well, what x value is that? This is my first point that is plotted all the way to the left. Left would be X, that's my domain. And this would be my point that's plotted all the way to the right, all the way to the right. All right, again, domain is my X values. I am only looking at the X axis for those answers here. So I can see that this is gonna be the X value of 0. So I'm gonna say my domain starts at 0 and it goes all the way over to this X value, which looks like it's gonna be 8. Now I gotta ask myself, is this gonna be a parenthesis or a bracket? These are both gonna end up being brackets because again, this is where my graph starts. It's an actual point on my graph. Same thing down below. This is an actual point on my graph. It's being plotted, so I know that these are included, they get brackets. Now if I look at the range, well, range moves up and down. So from my y-axis, what's my lowest y value? Right here on the graph. And then as I go up, 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 this value right here would be my largest y value that is on the graph. Again, y moves up and down, so I'm looking what's my lowest y value on the graph, my highest y value on the graph. All right, I know that this is gonna be the y value of 0 because it's all the way at the bottom, so I have my y value of 0 down below. That's going to be, again, where I'm starting, and now I have to see where I'm ending up. Be very careful here because I'm not at 20, I'm not at 24, I am somewhere like kind of in between here. So I have to figure out what these units are counting by, what these boxes go by. So I can see here that this would be 0. This next box would have to be 2 because this guy is a 4. So this would be 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, and then 24. All right, so I can see that this value is not at 22, but it's not at 24. It's right in between. What number is in between 22 and 24? You guys got it, 23. So I know that my lowest y value is at 0. Okay, it's at the bottom of my y-axis here. And what's going to be my highest y value? It's going to be 23. Again, these are both going to get brackets because these are points that are plotted on the graph. Again, this is a point that is on my graph. It is plotted on there. That's going to be number 2. Now let's look at number 3 to finish this up. So number 3 is a little bit tricky every year. It says, what's the range of the function shown below? So I'm just going to underline the question here. It says, what's the range? When I think of range, I should be thinking of my y values. All right, and again, I know that y moves up and down. All right, so just be aware of that. So I want to look on this graph, which is plotted right here. All right, you know what? Let me actually go over that with a highlighter. I'm going to just clearly highlight it out. This is the graph that I am looking at. I want to look at the lowest value of that graph. All right, I'm seeing that it's actually going to be right here. This is the lowest value of my graph. And what's the highest value? It's going to be right here. Okay, again, I'm looking at the graph that is already plotted. I just highlighted it out in pink. This is my lowest pink value. This is my highest pink value. I know range is y, and my y moves up and down. So here's my y-axis. Okay, from the origin, which is 0, I have to go down 1, 2. So that would be -2, all right, boxes to get to that lowest y value. Again, from the origin to get to the top, I'd have to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 would be my largest y value that is being plotted here. So I want to look for -2 and +5. I do not see that in choice 1 or choice 2. I'm also not seeing it in choice 3, so it has to be choice 4. But I know it's choice 4 because, again, this is a closed circle that's going to get a bracket. That means -2 is included as a value on this graph. Same thing with +5. This is an actual point that is plotted on the graph. That would be a closed circle. I don't see an open circle there. It's a solid line, so it's closed. 5 would also get a bracket, so I know that choice 4 is correct. All right, let's flip and go to our third page here. All right, so now we're on example 4. It says the effect of pH on the action of a certain enzyme is shown on the accompanying graph. State the domain of the graph. So again, I'm going to just underline the question here, state the domain of the graph. I know that domain is going to be my x values, and I know that my x values move left to right. All right, so here we go. If I want to state the domain, again, I want to look at all of my values that go to the left, all the values that are on the right. So one more time, I don't know if this strategy helped you guys before, but I'll do it again. Let me highlight out just the graph. This is the only thing I care about. So on the x-axis, all right, all the way to the left-hand side here, I can see that +4 is going to be my first x value that is plotted. And then as I go all the way to the right-hand side, I'm ending up all the way over here. This would be my last x value that is plotted. All right, again, x is the domain, goes left to right. So my value all the way to the left is +4. My value all the way to the right is +13. And again, that is going to get a bracket on both because 4 is a closed circle. It is on that graph. Same thing with 13. It's a closed circle. It is on that graph. Okay, all of these points would be closed circles because it's a solid graph. Nowhere do I see an open circle. All right, so I know that these would be brackets. Those values are included. All right, let's look at example 5. So number 5 says a meteorologist drew the accompanying graph to show the changes in relative humidity during a 24-hour period in New York City. Which of the following represents the domain of the graph? So again, the first thing I want to do is just look at the question. It says, which of the following represents the domain? I know that domain would be my x values. And then as another refresher, I know that x moves left to right. All right, if the highlighting technique is helpful, I'm just going to do that again for number 5. So this is the graph that they gave me. All right, so I'm going to highlight that out. This is the only place that I should be looking as I'm answering this question. So if I want to look at the domain, I want to look on this graph, what's the value that's plotted all the way to the left, which is going to be down here, and what is the value that is plotted all the way to the right, again, which is over here. I am only looking at my x values because I am trying to find the domain, and again, domain moves left to right. It is at the bottom of the graph here. So I know this would be my x value of 0, and this would be my x value of 24. As I look at my answer choices, immediately I can say, well, maybe it's number 1. It's definitely not 2, and it's definitely not 3 because they are not using the numbers 0 and 24 at all. All right, and then as I look at choice 4, maybe it's choice 4. Now, just like we've been saying this whole time, if I have a closed circle, I should be thinking a few different things. I'm going to draw a diagram that we had gone over way back when, and it looked like this. It was a solid box. All right, here were the eyes, here was the nose, and here was the mouth. All right, I don't know how many of us still utilize this when we're working with inequalities or when we are working with domain and range, but this is something that you can try to use right now because I can see that all of these answers are in compound inequality form. All right, we went over this way back when in Unit 3. That's probably the last time maybe you had seen this face. I'm sure we've used it a few times since then. But this is what I should be thinking of. If I have the greater than or equal to or a less than or equal to symbol, that would be a closed circle or it would be a bracket. All right, so as I look here, when my domain, when that x value of 0 is starting the graph, that's a closed circle. So I know I don't want to see a less than symbol. If anything, it should be less than or equal to. Same thing at 24. 24 is a closed circle. Closed circle, again, would have to be greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, one of those. Okay, so this isn't going to work. All right, so choice 1 is definitely out. It would have to be choice 4. All right, all right. I want you to right now try numbers 6 and 7 on your own. Please pause the video. And once you've really given your best effort on 6 and 7, then you can unpause and check back to see what those answers should have been. All right, boys and girls, so here was the answer to number 6. It says the accompanying graph shows the elevation of a certain region in New York State as a hiker travels along a trail. State the domain, state the range. So again, I know domain is my x values. So as I look here on my graph, my x value all the way to the left is 0. And on my graph, my x value all the way to the right was 12. So I know that x moves from 0 to 12. All right, be careful. You only want to look at these values at the bottom. As I look at the range moves up and down. So this was my lowest value on my graph. So what y value was this? It was 1,000. And then as I go all the way up to the top, all the way up to the top, all the way up to the top, all 3 of these guys are going to technically be my greatest values, and they all have the value of 1,500. So again, I know my lowest y value is 1,000, my largest was 1,500, and all of these guys are getting brackets because they are closed points. They are all on my graph. All right, it's going to be the exact same reason that way we went over in number 5. And then number 7, last but not least, as we look here, it says it says the accompanying graph shows the heart rate and beats per minute of a jogger during a 4-minute interval. What is the range of the jogger's heart rate? So again, in all of these word problems, try not to get hung up on any of those keyword, per minute, a key number. It's a 4-minute interval, okay? All of that's in there to just describe the graph that you're looking at. If it says what's the range, you are just looking at the y values. Again, y moves up and down. So as I look here on my graph, this is the lowest y value that was plotted. And then on my graph, this was the highest y value. Only looking at the y values, I can see I'm moving from 0 to 110. Both of these get a bracket because, again, they are clearly closed circles. All right, they are on that graph. They are included. At the bottom of the page here, you guys are supposed to be doing the closure and the homework on your own. Please make sure you are getting that done, showing all work that is necessary, and then submitting everything on Canvas. All right, have a good day.